a story about the day I knew I had a passion for catechesis. It took place early on in my, my time as a catechist. I was teaching in a Catholic school in a remote area of British Columbia, Canada. I had gone up there to volunteer right out of college for the Catholic Diocese of Prince George. And all of us teachers had come from either the United States, the British Isles, or Canada. And we worked in a school with children who were very poor. Most of them were from an indigenous tribe in British Columbia. And so it was quite a challenge, and yet a tremendous grace to be there with them. And I was teaching 3rd grade, and one day I was preparing, and getting ready to teach this lesson to the children. It was based on the 8th chapter of John, verses 3 through 11, the story of the woman accused of adultery. Now, those of you who have taught for quite a while know that we take those kind of stories and tone them down a little bit. So it was just a story about, in the book, it was about somebody who'd done something very bad. But of course, the gist of it was that Jesus forgave her and, of course, challenged the people that wanted to stone her to look at their own behavior first. Well, here I was in front of a group of very restless 3rd graders, and I knew that I had to get them engaged somehow in the lesson. So while I had my teacher guide cradled in my left arm, I began to veer away from the page and start to tell the story rather than read it. And as I did so, I became so engrossed in the drama of the story. If you recall, that's just such an incredible story of people bringing this woman, you can imagine them just, the outrage in the crowd. They're challenging Jesus, that she should be stoned. When I got to that part, all the little boys, kind of sat up and took notice. And so my voice picked up as the story progressed. And, I was describing how the crowd was probably yelling and, stone her, this is what the law says. And then I came to the point in the story where Jesus stooped down and wrote in the dirt. And I, again, was so involved in the story. And I got down onto the floor, crouched down, and I began to make marks in the dust on the floor. And I was so engrossed, I just kept kind of drawing, and things got very quiet. And then I noticed that it was really quiet. And I thought, wow, I wonder if the kids are still here. And I looked up, and I saw all of them leaning over their desks to see what I was doing. It was at that moment that I felt the wonder of holding people entranced by the gospel, and I knew that I had this passion for catechesis. So I wonder how that resonates with you. Here we are now at the start of a new school year. I know we have Catholic school teachers as part of our audience. Some of you are catechists in parish programs. Probably some of you, we may have, I'm not sure exactly who the makeup of our audience is, but I'm sure we have catechetical leaders, maybe some school administrators. But all of you have obviously linked in because you have an interest in this topic. And so I'd ask you to think about, what are you looking forward to as a new school year begins? What excites you about sharing faith with children? And I'd invite you to maybe, if you have a pen and a paper handy and want to just jot down a response to those questions. What are you looking forward to this year? What excites you about sharing faith with children? And if you want to send those, and just type that into the chat box, as Debbie said. That won't be shown to everybody, but it would just come right to Debbie. That would be great. If you feel like you want to share your response, you could send it in. And what I'm going to do is come back to these a little bit later. And then, as Debbie noted, as we go through the webinar, if you think of a question you want to bring up, please put that into the chat box and send that off. And again, I will address those questions as we get towards the end of the webinar. And then just a little bit of a note. Debbie mentioned that one of the things I do with Sadlier is write a weekly blog. And so this is actually a flyer from another conference that I did, so you could ignore the part on the bottom. But this gives you the web address up at the top, webelieveandshare.com. And I hope that you'll log on. Every Wednesday a new blog is posted. And this coming week, tomorrow actually, the post that I've just written is on getting back to the school year and starting a new school year, along with a prayer that you can download, use with your faculty, with other catechists, however you want to use it. It's a prayer for a new school year. So do drop by to visit. So let's look now at the what, why, and how of catechesis, and particularly taking Jesus as a model for catechesis. He had such a welcoming approach to the way he taught people. He would draw them into a teaching through storytelling. He had incredible lessons and beautiful insights that he related. Whether he was engaging people or enraging them, he involved them. And that, I think, is really the key to the catechetical enterprise. So let's look at how Jesus models this approach, and an approach that we need to take as we work with children. Starting with the what of catechesis. Now, going back to my opening story, I wasn't just telling the children any story. I was telling them a story from the gospel. It was a story about Jesus, and it had an incredible message about forgiveness and about not judging other people. If you recall that story, Jesus says, whoever among you has never sinned, you can throw the first stone. What a powerful, powerful lesson that is about being non-judgmental towards others. I had my guide in my hand, and that meant that I was just teaching from the top of my head, but I was using a text that had been carefully put together by writers, theologians, all sorts of people that work to bring these catechetical texts to life. The what of catechesis is laid out in our catechetical documents that have been developed over the past few decades, with particularly the General Directory for Catechesis, the National Directory for Catechesis, and of course the Catechism of the Catholic Church. There is solid development of this content by all of the publishers, and I would say particularly Sadlier, if I might say so, in this area. When you look at the what of catechesis, there is a broad scope of doctrine and content that is covered over the course of a child's learning, through, say, kindergarten up through, through high school and beyond. Of course, catechesis is a lifelong process, but I'm focusing today pretty much on the content of catechesis for children. And so when you look at what our content is, here's just some of the doctrinal content that a child is going to be exposed to and learn as they move through the different grade levels. We teach about the Trinity, God as Creator and Father, Jesus as friend, Redeemer, and Messiah, the Holy Spirit as our guide, inspiration, and wisdom. The Trinity is key to all Catholic catechesis. Both the General Directory and the National Directory of Catechesis emphasize this, as well as the centrality of Jesus Christ. We say all catechesis is Christocentric. So we revolve our catechesis, in particular for children, around Jesus. We teach about the Church and Catholic identity through belief and practice, and also how the Church is structured through the authority of the Pope and the bishops, and how we grow in participation, which is also key to a child's understanding and knowledge of Catholic identity. We teach about the sacraments and about sacramental theology in ways that we worship. Liturgical formation includes an understanding of the various forms of worship and prayer that we use to express and celebrate our faith. And of course, in Catholicism, our sacramental life is so very, very important to us. We teach about Catholic social teaching and the corporal and spiritual works of mercy. And one of the key ways of doing this is teaching compassion and justice by looking at the example of Jesus as well as the saints, particularly Mary. And as children get older, we teach about the Old Testament covenant and the ongoing work of God throughout creation. And so there is, a teaching around the knowledge of how to use the Bible and an exploration of its rich symbolism and literary genres that form part of catechetical know-how, if you will. Now, I could go on, but this just kind of gives you a sense of how incredibly rich the documents are and how rich the content is for children's catechesis. What is so important, along with the scope, is also the sequencing of this. Catechesis is ongoing. I mean, we should be, it should be womb to tomb, if you will, that there isn't a place where we just stop learning about our faith. And so the very nature of catechesis makes it developmental. And so as we present these different doctrines and different teachings of the Church, we do it in a way that is age appropriate, ways in which a child can understand it as they grow more capable of cognitive understanding and the active practice of discipleship. This makes the sequence of catechesis as important as its scope. And as a child grows, of course, that breadth and depth of these primary areas of belief and practice grows with them. I personally find this very heartening, and I like to encourage new catechists and new teachers to consider that we're not the last word or the only word that a child will hear say on the Trinity or the sacraments, but that we keep bringing this content back into play as children have more and more understanding of the depth of the content. So one of the things I encourage catechists and teachers to do is to consult what we call in publishing the front matter of your books. A lot of times we'll just skip right over that, get right to chapter 1. But most of our programs, and of course Sadlier's We Believe program has a lovely scope and sequence chart that shows kind of at a glance where you're going with the what of catechesis over the course of a year. And it's a very important way to start off the school year is to look at the flow of the content that you're going to be covering this year, as well as the connections with the catechesis that have preceded and follow it, both throughout the year. But I know in Sadlier's books, we look at maybe the grades before and the grades after so that you get a sense of how that catechesis flows and how that sequence flows. Discipleship grows through the lived experience of faith, however, taking the what beyond just the head and into the heart and the hands. The General Directory for Catechesis identifies 6 tasks of catechesis as a way to make the content of catechesis whole and integrated into something more active. And this is in the section 84 of the General Directory. And these 6 tasks are promoting knowledge of the faith, which, of course, is obvious with the content that I just talked about, as well as liturgical education, learning how we worship, how we pray as the people of God, moral formation in the choices that we make, teaching to pray in a real broad sense of prayer, education for community life, and then missionary initiative, taking what we learn out into the world. Another way to look at it is through these real active verbs. That the first task is learning the stories and the teachings of Jesus and the Church, celebrating the sacraments and deepening the connection between worship and life, choosing lives of moral goodness, generosity, love, compassion, and forgiveness in imitation of Jesus, praying at every opportunity, and listening for the guidance of the Holy Spirit. Living as members of the Christian community by taking an active part in the life of the parish and the wider church, beginning with the domestic church, the family. And then sharing what we know, believe, and understand through acts of service and witness. Now you'll see on the left side of the slide there, Project Disciple. And this is how Sadlier has taken the 6 tasks and taken those verbs and put them together. We pray, we learn, we celebrate, we share, we choose, we live. A little bit out of order there, but they fit in the circle a little bit better that way. But it's how we have, at Sadlier have taken the 6 tasks and then integrated them into the catechetical process with very active language. Now, when I was teaching those 3rd graders that day, the children were, 3rd graders are pretty restless, and as a brand new teacher, I had more than a few questions about what I was doing and how it was being received by a group of restless kids. And, what I now know is that I'm part of a much bigger picture, and I hope that something took that day, but I do recognize, as I said earlier, that it's not all up to just one of us or to a single lesson. The what of catechesis grows with time, with understanding, and with experience. So this brings us to the rationale, the why of catechesis for children. For those of you who have been in maybe Catholic education or parish catechesis for a few years, know that we've had kind of a back and forth conversation over the past few decades about the effectiveness of catechesis for children. What are the pros and the cons of children's catechesis? Well, certainly on the pro side, it's important to start teaching children the faith when they're young. And this is something that the catechetical documents in the church all emphasize, how vital it is to teach children from a very early age about Jesus, about their faith, about how we celebrate and pray and make good choices. But there have been arguments that have said, well, maybe we're putting too much emphasis on children. And what about the adults? Are we focusing on the kids and forgetting about the adults? Or, what about the parents? And I know that many of you are frustrated with that. You want to know, how do I engage the parents more? And why aren't they more involved in their children's, faith formation? And maybe we shouldn't focus on children so much as the family. Well, my view of it is that it's not an either-or situation, it's a both-and. We need catechesis basically for all age levels. And when it comes to children's catechesis, I think that part of these back and forth conversations, and particularly the cons, we're spending too much time on children, whatever, we've tended to forget the importance of learning with one's peers. And I believe that is an incredibly important part of children's catechesis. When I look back at my own life, I certainly consider my family as primary in my development of faith. But so too was my formal religious education, which I happened to receive in Catholic schools as well as through involvement in our parish. And my 2 best friends were named Stephanie and Bill, and they were incredibly important to me in the development of my faith. Bill and I started in kindergarten together, and we went all the way through grade school. And as little kids, we fostered a deep interest and love for the saints. And I still recall, reading saint stories with Bill and sometimes play acting them out in the backyard. It was very important to me. My friend Stephanie and I went all the way through 5th grade through high school together, where we shared girlfriend talk that ranged into spiritual issues and ones of, questions about why we were Catholic and why that was important to us. I'm still friends with both Bill and Stephanie, and I consider the bonding that we experienced through our religious and spiritual formation key to those enduring relationships. Not long ago, I read an article on how we need to tell children new stories in order to counter a cultural story of greed and entitlement and the acquisition of things that becomes so vital and seems to be so central in our society. But as part of that, I think, and this is where catechesis does both so well, we also need to tell children old stories. We need to ground them in virtues of love and fidelity, and of compassion and mercy, of forgiveness and generosity. When I engaged the children in the story of a woman who everyone else had written off as sinful and other, that's an example of one of those old stories of mercy and forgiveness that stay forever contemporary. The children in my class that day were, as I said earlier, part of an indigenous people. And they understood in some way what it was to be cast to the margins of society. Many of their families struggled with poverty, alcoholism, domestic violence, and a certain amount of loss of their tribal identity. I want to believe that for some, the old story stuck somewhere, revealing the compassionate and inclusive love of Jesus for all people. There's just no question that children, as well as young people and adults, need these stories told and retold as we all grow in our experiences and our understanding. If we wait until children are old enough to hear them, or we rely on the family as the sole source of catechesis, we seem to be shortchanging the process. So that's where I see the why of catechesis for children so incredibly important. And now let's move to the how. The youth organization and group Young Life has a motto that I just love. It's called, and it goes, it's a sin to bore a kid with the gospel. It's a sin to bore a kid with the gospel. I knew a bishop once who said, well, the Catholic version of that is it's a mortal sin to bore a kid with the gospel, which I love. Back to my story of teaching those little third graders, not only were the children engaged with the story, but I was too. When I got down on the floor, I not only broke open a biblical account for a group of little children, but I also discovered something essential about the way Jesus taught. There's an artfulness of Jesus in this story, and it contains a great lesson on the how of catechesis. Jesus caught the attention of those he was with. Before throwing words out into an angry mob, he took his time. He allowed them to quiet themselves. He intrigued them with his gestures and stories, and then he challenged them to bring their beliefs into action. So can you think of other stories or accounts in the Gospels that tell something about the way Jesus engaged others in his teaching? Think about the use of images with which his listeners were familiar. He used shepherds and mustard seeds, lost coins and lilies of the field. He took people where they were at. He also had a way of throwing questions back at people. And in doing so, he encouraged them to go deeper. He also challenged them to grow. You could probably think of other accounts in the Gospels in which Jesus serves as a model of the methodology of catechesis. So let's look at 3 characteristics of artful catechesis: welcoming, loving, and challenging, taking Jesus as our model. These, I think, encompass the how of catechesis. First, welcoming. In the account where the children are brought to Jesus, which is just one of my favorite stories in the Gospel. Do you remember that story where people are bringing children forward? The disciples are so worried that he's they're going to bother him, and he says, no, let the children come. He treated the children with dignity, and he noted their important placement in the kingdom of God. The National Directory on Catechesis says, the most important task of the catechesis of children is to provide, through the witness of adults, an environment in which young people can grow in faith. It's so important to establish a welcoming space for children. The first and foremost, I think, is providing a safe and warm environment. Think about where they're going to be coming in, your classroom. If you're in a parish, maybe you are in a classroom or in a little gathering space. How can you warm that atmosphere? First of all, of course, it has to be safe. And when I mean safe, it's not just that we have the exits for the fire, if there's a fire or whatever, all of those physical safety needs. But a safe environment is one in which I can speak, and I'm not going to be laughed at. I'm going to be valued and respected. And I'm going to find in my teacher, my catechist, the teacher aides, whoever's there, a sense of warmth, of welcome. I'm so glad you're here, kind of approach to children. Another one that's so very important to children is to learn their names. And learn, we're starting a new school year. How quickly can you learn their names and call them by name? That is so very important. So many times in the Bible, Jesus uses people's names. And I think of that wonderful story of Zacchaeus, the man who had to climb a tree to see what Jesus was doing. And one of the most touching parts of that story to me is when Jesus calls him by name. Zacchaeus, come down. I'm coming to your house today. Such a wonderful, warm way to welcome Zacchaeus, whom others had, like the woman in the other story, had written off. Providing children what I call their own seats, a space for them to be. It's very important for kids to feel that they have a place. I'm a mother of 2 children. They're both adults now, but I remember taking them to church and how important it was for them not to feel crowded in the pew. My son once said to me when he was around 10, when you get your own seat, it makes a big difference. And there is something about that we create a space for them to be. Another part of this is being prepared and ready to meet them, so that when they come into your classroom, when they come into your group, you're not running around getting people, things in order at the last minute, but that you have a sense of preparedness. They come into a room where they feel that they have been anticipated, that their coming is anticipated, and that you're really, really glad to see them, and you're ready for them. And then, of course, the last and very, very important is that we foster an atmosphere of mutual respect, of active listening, that we're not just talking to kids all the time, but we're inviting them to be engaged through questions and through ideas that they have to share, and especially honoring each person's dignity. A second characteristic of artfulness in catechesis to me is being loving and fostering a loving atmosphere and a loving presence. And to illustrate this, I want to tell you another favorite story. I found this in a magazine. It was actually about a Baptist church, but I think it fits our situation as well. It's a story about a man named Red Davis. He was a very important man in the community where he lived in, I believe it's down in eastern Texas. He was head of a company that was very prominent in the area, and leader of the church where he was. When he retired, he approached the pastor of the church, and he told them that, now I'm retired, I have some time, I want to become more involved in the church. And the pastor figured, well, Red was a CEO of this important company, surely he'd want to be on the finance committee or, the council, some prestigious position in the church. But Red had other ideas. He told the pastor that he heard the preschool Sunday school teacher position was open, and he was the man for the job. And that was how Red Davis came to show up every Sunday morning to sit on the floor and tell Bible stories to little children. The author of the article said, Red didn't know much about teaching children in the beginning, but he was warm, kind, and willing. And he knew that patience and hugs are the keys to a child's heart. Red used to call every child in his class every Saturday evening just to ask how their week had gone. He always ended the conversations by telling them he looked forward to seeing them on Sunday morning. And again, the author writes, if you had a child in Red's class, you knew you had to be there every Sunday because none of Red's kids ever wanted to miss church. Now just wrap your minds around that idea. The kids took to following Red around. Soon they were dubbed Red's Army. He ended up teaching for 25 years. When he died, his funeral was packed with people who had either been in his class or had had children or grandchildren in his classes. At the end of the article, the author related a story about how a little boy was in the grocery store with his mother one day. Mama, he said, I just saw God. The mother looked up and she saw her child pointing at Red Davis. The author writes, when he tried to wrap his little mind around the very big idea, the best he could do was think of Red. What do you think characterizes Red Davis as a loving presence among the children? I wish we had an opportunity to chat about that together, but there are so many things that come forward in that story for me. One was the description of Red as warm, kind, and willing. He valued the children, and they knew it. And isn't this modeling Jesus? So let's look at some ideas for fostering a loving presence. First of all, taking time to let children know you care about them. I think, as I said earlier, knowing their names, but also knowing a little bit about them. It just means so much when someone takes that time to express, I'm so glad you're here. Any kind of language that we can use to let them know throughout the school year that we're happy to have them in our class. Secondly is attending to their needs, their wants, their concerns. Both those that they express out loud and those that that we just sense, but that remain unspoken. And those of you who are teaching older children know that a lot of what they are feeling, needing, concerned about remain unspoken. Jesus did this through acts of compassion and healing. And any time we can show compassion towards the children in our care, and also through healing words, when they are experiencing fears or just coming, you just kind of tell they're kind of quiet or they're, they had their feelings hurt or whatever, that we offer them healing and kind words as much as we can. Red communicated with the kids. He called them every Saturday night. Now that may be way beyond what most of us can do, but there are a lot of different ways we can communicate with the children in our classes, through phone calls certainly, or email, text messages, or postcards. Some way to let kids know that you care about them. particularly if they miss class. Those of you who, particularly I'm thinking of parish programs of catechesis, and how we have sometimes that erratic attendance of children. So if a child misses, to send them an email or a text, and we missed you in class, we hope you'll come back, anything like that that will help them feel welcome. Now, I do want to give a caution here about electronic means of communication. I think it's very important to have the parents' permission to communicate directly with their child. And of course, I think calling every week would probably be a little too much. Not only do you not have time, but we don't want to look like we're stalking kids either. So just be very cautious about it, but I do think we need to extend communication to children. It's such an important way. And then lastly, but certainly not least, is praying for them. This is a wonderful way to enlarge your own heart, particularly with children who are difficult, those who are reticent or who are erratic in their attendance. And, some kids just are a challenge to be with. And I just think sometimes bringing them into your prayers can be a way to foster deeper appreciation of who they are and perhaps expand a sense of understanding and patience for who they are. And then the third way of artful catechesis, I think, is engaging children. When you think about the Gospels, in which crowds of people, sometimes thousands of people, follow Jesus, even to remote places, what do you think engaged people in the teachings that Jesus did? I mean, after all, he had no PowerPoint slides, he had no microphones, he had just his voice. Why did they follow him? Well, in my mind, no one is going to follow someone who's boring, judgmental, or an obvious hypocrite. That's why the starting point for good children's catechesis is the adult who witnesses more with her or his example than words. Someone like Red Davis. Jesus invited and he inspired his followers. He never coerced or shamed them. One of the things that I do for my own soul's health is twice a week I go to a dance class called Nia. I just love it. We all dance around. We don't worry about how we look. And it's just it's good workout, but it's a wonderful way to, in a sense, kind of unload stress. One thing that I've noticed is how when a new person comes to the class, they tend to place themselves in the back row. And back there, it's much harder to follow the lead of the instructor. We don't learn much from the back row. That's why involving kids through active participation is so important. If I had it to do over again with that third grade class, I'd probably tell the story of Jesus and the woman about to be stoned to death in a different way. Rather than me telling the whole story to the kids, I'd have them up. Maybe I'd have them in a circle, playing roles as I told the story. I'd get them all riled up and then quiet them down by crouching down to write in the dust. It would be far more dramatic, and it would leave a much more lasting impact on them. So whenever you can, get the kids up and moving and engaged and involved in the story. And then lastly, Jesus challenged his disciples. While they were still in training, he sent them out in twos to preach and to expel demons. Talk about some pretty heavy responsibilities that he placed upon them. Sometimes I think we don't challenge kids enough. Really give them something to chew on, to be engaged with. And I think it's also important to empower children. Many of them are frightened by a world they don't understand and that can seem overwhelming to them. I remember a story of empowerment when I was a child. I think I must have been in first or second grade. And I remember vividly our teacher telling us that we could all baptize someone in case of an emergency. Now, really, the odds of me being on the sidelines during an accident were pretty nil, but I believed with all my heart that should that occur and there were no priests there to baptize, I could step in as a witness, an active participant in my faith. Talk about empowerment. It's very hopeful for children to engage them by offering them challenges that they can handle and with which they can be successful. Some ideas that come to mind are go green activities. Children are passionately interested in the environment. They can do things like pick up trash and recycle and do something to pitch in and help. Children can offer small acts of kindness at home or at school. There's lots of different ways that we could encourage children to plant little seeds of faith. That's another way to empower them. A third way is to help them sacrifice their own wants for the good of others. I remember being taught that as a child and how I could offer something up. I don't know that we use that language so much anymore, but that idea that I could maybe give up, my time of playing, maybe to read a story to a younger child, or I could give up a little TV time in order to help my mom do the dishes. Anything like that. They're small things, but they're empowering. Another way is by contributing to a family or a class project to help those with fewer advantages and resources. One of the things that I have written for Sadlier, it's online on the We Live Our Faith website, our project Disciple activities for young people, kids in middle school, in which you plan a class project where they go out, say, to a nursing home or do something for the parish that gets them involved. Having done this myself with junior high kids, I know they love to be active and to find that they can do something that is going to make for a better world. So those are just some ideas off the top of my head that I think are challenging at a level at which children can participate and also empower them. So we've looked at the what, the why, and the how of children's catechesis. And so what I'd like to do is go back to those earlier questions that I asked you. What am I looking forward to? What excites me about the coming year? And a third question that I'll just pose to you now, what questions remain? So I want to give you a little time if you would like to type in any of your responses into the chat box, and maybe some of you have done that already, and send those to Debbie, and I'll turn that back over to Debbie to see if we have any questions that I might pick up on or any comments that we might respond to.
All right, Kathy, thank you. I do have, let me read this one to you. As I prepare to engage with the adventures of a new school year, I am grateful to see my own growth in the Word and the ways in which our Lord has and continues to speak to me. One of my greatest obstacles is my ability to engage One of my greatest obstacles is my ability to engage the primary catechist, the parent. I go through great preparation to inform, welcome, and engage them, but I seem to be falling short. I feel as I am sending out the wedding invitation, yet so few accept. Any insights?
Wow, what a wonderful question. I know that I get asked to speak to this a lot, so it's a question and a concern throughout the country, if that's any consolation. I do think, I tend to use the word engage with parents. I think that we have to look for ways to engage them in the life of the parish and the school. And sometimes we tend to maybe overload them with information. I look for ways that are going to be engaging for parents in the sense of what are some things that they can do in the home, for example. that link with your catechetical lessons. I don't think they have a lot of time to read a lot of material, so I think sending things maybe to the home in little bites, if you will, sound bites, I would use that term, but you might do it through email messages, or I know of a church in Denver that they send out a little email blast at the end of every week, and it's just maybe 1 or 2 ideas for taking the lesson into the home. I also think it's important to have two-way communication. Can the parents contact you? Can they send you their ideas? If they have questions, how do they get a hold of you? A lot of times we are sending information out, but we are not allowing for that communication to flow back towards the parish or school. And then I always like to share this example. I remember when my son Eric was in middle school, and he had been in school for about a month, and we started getting phone calls from all 4 of his primary teachers. He had a language arts teacher and a math teacher and a science teacher, and I forget the 4th one. But within the course of a month, every week we got a call from one of those teachers. And the first time I got the call, I thought, oh my gosh, what did he do wrong? That's my first, that's what parents tend to think. And what I heard was, this is Mrs. So-and-so, I have Eric in my language arts class. I just love having him in my class. He writes such creative stories. She had something specific to tell me about him. And that followed with all of his other teachers. They have something specific to tell me. So I would really encourage all of you, if you can, to try to call all of the parents. I think that voice-to-voice contact is very important. And maybe you split up your class list and do maybe 5 a week, or over the course of a month, so you're not overloading yourself. And really look for something specific to give back to the teacher. The reason or back to the parent. The reason I say this is important is once that happened to me, I got very engaged in Eric's school after I heard from all those teachers. So those are just some ideas that I have, and I'm sure that there are many others, but I hope that's helpful. But thank you. That's a great, great question and a great, great insight.
Tying into the, and thanks, Kathy, for that. Tying into the same theme of parents, though, here's another. It says, how can I stress to the parents the importance of attending Mass with their children?
That is another very, very important thing. And I think probably, when you look back on what I said earlier about how Jesus never coerced or shamed people, I think sometimes we do tend to maybe overload parents with messages that you should do this. I always try to think about the benefits, how wonderful it is to bring the children, the family, to engage them in the life of worship, to encourage them to prepare, sending them ways to get kids more interested in coming to church. I know it can be difficult. I mean, who wants to go to church and battle with your kids every Sunday? It's boring. I don't understand it. I don't want to go. It's just easier sometimes to give in and say, okay, we're not going to do it. One of the things Sadlier has on our website, and I'm not trying to sell you anything here, but I just want to let you know of these kind of resources, and you can find them in other places. But we have something called Question of the Week. There's activities that go around the liturgical year on our website, webelieveweb.com. And just passing along some of those links to parents that help them prepare for Sunday Eucharist. I know that I used to read the Gospels to my children before we went to Mass, and they would kind of perk up when the Gospels were proclaimed. And so just little ways that parents can help their children learn about sections of the Mass and engage them might be, I think always if your messages are encouraging, affirmative, and excited, any ways that we can excite people rather than coerce them, I think would be of great benefit.
Okay, thank you. One attendee mentioned that on passing on my Catholic faith, what is important is realizing that sometimes this is the first time my PSR children enter into a church, which is really significant in everything that we do, even us here at Sadlier. But another person had wrote, I'm also concerned because as a kindergarten teacher, I feel that many students come in with very little or no religious knowledge. I also find that many have no experience in attending church. How can I encourage families to go without being pushy? Again, this all ties into the same thing you had just mentioned, I think. Anything else you wanted to add on that?
I do think that's a very important point, and I think one of the things that we talked about with Sadlier's materials when we were putting them together is how the child plays a role of evangelizer. We often think of the parent, or the adult to the child, but I think of that Red Davis story. In a sense, those children were so excited. The Red Davis, no one wanted to miss church on Sunday because they didn't want to miss Red's class. Now, if you've got classes happening, this would be, of course, for those of you in parish religious education programs, and this wouldn't apply, of course, to your schools, but if classes are happening on Sundays, that can be kind of a little hook there. For those of you in schools, it's a little bit trickier, but that idea of, in a sense, exciting children about it, bringing them over to the church and showing them around the church so that they feel comfortable with it, and then inviting parents to do that, giving parents in a sense, some entree into the community. Maybe the parents are daunted by coming to church. Some of them have had bad experiences. Some of them may feel, if they're in a marriage that's, maybe they're divorced or remarried and they don't feel that they're welcome. Whatever it is that we can do to help, smooth the waters, if you will, and help them feel that they are welcome, that this is a place where all God's people come to pray, and that they are welcomed and wanted, then that is very important. But yes, I wish I had a magic, just a magic response for that that would make all of that just, easy to do. I think what you are doing as teachers and catechists, though, are very, very important. As you evangelize and encourage children to evangelize, that is very important.
Nancy suggested that she tears out chapters home and sends them home to the parents to see what is being covered in the classroom, and to let her know if the child has any questions that she needs to go back over again in class that they didn't quite get the first time. So that's a thank you for that suggestion. We had another question here. Patty asked, can you provide resources to help us in understanding the gospel parables so that we can better explain the breakdown of the parables to the children? Kathy, would you want to answer that, or would you like us prefer to email some resources to Patty on that one?
I could certainly send some resources. That would be, that would probably be helpful if you have that information, Debbie. Then I could do that. There's just so many wonderful children's Bible resources out there that I think could be, of great help. So I could certainly research that and send her some ideas.
Okay, we're very close to the hour. There's several more questions. The questions that we have not answered, I think what we'll, I apologize that we're not covering them here, but we will answer you directly, and hopefully that will work. But there was one I just wanted to make mention with the new Common Core. How do I change my lessons to cover it? In regards to religion, the NCEA is working on the Catholic Common Core. There's several of us here at Sadlier. Carol Eipers, for one, Laura Egan, who is our product manager in the language arts area, are serving on a committee with NCEA in helping plan a Catholic Common Core. We just had a meeting on that, and the meetings are continuing. I can say here at Sadlier that's up front on our radar screen in what to do in terms of materials for you to work with or actual Common Core standards for you to follow. I don't think that those are ready yet from the NCEA. I know that it is being worked on. We'll continue with our own announcements and addressing that. So I appreciate your question. If I didn't give you a good enough answer, just write back and I'll address it to you offline. But at this point, I think that we're going to do I believe our wrap-up now for the webinar, just so we don't take up any more of your time. We so appreciate your staying on for this hour. One other question: how do I download the webinar? We're going to send you an email that has a link where you'll find it, or if you go to to YouTube and look for Sadlier Religion, you will find the webinar will be posted there. So once we send you out the email for that, another question or conversation prior to this webinar came up about the certificates. I think some of you are receiving points or units for attending the webinar, which we are very delighted. This certificate, we're going to send you, again, another email, and I apologize. The email will ask you to provide your name and address information, the name as you would like it to appear in the certificate. When you hit the word submit, that information will be sent to me in an Excel spreadsheet. We'll then, in turn, complete the certificate, fill it out, mail it to you, so you'll receive it at the address that you give to us. Alrighty, Kathy, I saw you did have a closing prayer.
I do.
Would you care to?
Yeah. And you could see my screen. Did that move over to the screen?
Yes.
Okay. Because my computer just kind of went black for a minute.
Oh no.
Technology. So I do. I have. I wrote a little. Debbie mentioned that I have written also for 23rd publications, and I wrote a little booklet, a prayer book for catechists. So I thought we could close with this prayer, a prayer for a joyful heart, particularly as you are beginning a new school year. So let us pray. There is a wonderful story about you, Jesus, the one where you play with the children, even though your disciples grumble with disapproval. It inspires me. When the criticism of others or my own negative thoughts make me dour, help me to lighten up. Remind me to laugh when I take life too seriously, to pay attention to the beauty in small things, to allow time for rest, relaxation, and rejuvenation, and to draw energy from the children, whose exuberance brings levity and light. Give me a heart full of joy. Amen. And I wish all of you a wonderful school year. Thank you so much for joining us.
And one last commercial. This, as I said at the very beginning, was the first of a series of webinars we're doing as we join you in celebrating the Year of Faith. Our next one will be on welcoming you into Catechetical Sunday with catechists as agents of the new evangelization. Details of that will be sent out via email, and we'll also ask NCCL Lee Nagel to publicize it again for us. So we'll be sending that to you, and in the meantime, if you have questions that weren't addressed, we will answer them to you. If you have other questions or comments, my email address is debbiem, DEBBIEM, @sadlier.com. I'd be happy to help you out or forward it on to Kathy so she can help you out. Again, thank you very much, and best wishes for a great school year. But this will end our webinar. Thank you. Bye-bye.